This is a Tracking the Tropics update with the certified most accurate weather team at First Coast News.
Hi there, hi there, friends, and good day. I hope you're having a good day here across the First Coast and wherever you're watching this forecast from Meteorologist Robert Speta. This is Talkin Tropics, and we're always keeping an update. Not only current and active storm systems, which as of now there is none of that out there, but we do have something in that long range forecast that is not worrisome, but noteworthy. The Climate Prediction Center, as shown here, does show a less than 20% chance of something developing in the tropics as we look ahead over the course of the next 2 weeks. So we're looking more into mid-July in that long-range outlook. The National Hurricane Center, though, still has no chance. They don't have anything really to speak of out in that 7-day outlook here at this time. So this is really one of those really low, long-range outlooks, something like that we're going to continue to monitor. I'm going to break down why we're keeping an eye on it, as well as what we could be expecting over the upcoming days. So let's get into it here, and at the end of this update, I'm going to show you my interview with the director of the National Hurricane Center. We were talking about the long-range outlook with the 2025 hurricane season, but also how you could prepare for it as well. So there we go. This is from the Climate Prediction Center. This is CPC, if you ever hear that term there. Not the National Hurricane Center. It is a different entity, but they look more at that very long range, 3-week outlook, not only in the Atlantic, but they also put out a graphical output for basically the entire globe. So you can use this specific product even if you want to look up, cyclones in the Indian Ocean or in Australia or something like that, or even flood threats in those parts of the world. They look very long range, and they take a bunch of different factors together and say, hey, I think there's going to be something developing here in that extended period of time. So should have brought a glass of water in here. All right, so let's take a look. Actually, first, this is from the CPC, and what are they looking at? Well, here's the idea, the thought process here is that we have this front that's dipping in from the north as we go ahead through mid part of next week, Wednesday, Thursday, into Friday. So we're looking all the way out through mid portions of July here, by the 17th, 18th, and 19th, and we're going to start to see this trough set up across the state of Florida and the Gulf of Mexico, and it might feel like deja vu, in the sense that that just a few weeks ago, we had, prior to Chantal, we had a trough that set up over the state of Florida and the Gulf of Mexico. And that trough, even before there was any possible formation on the National Hurricane Center's radar, myself and a lot of other meteorologists were looking at it going, you know what? This type of setup could produce something. It is July. We are looking at a broad area of low pressure over warm sea surface temperatures. Something could spit up. And then, long and behold, a week later, Chantal started to develop, and that went up and brought flooding to the Carolinas. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen here. Just like at that time, we were saying we're not 100% confident, but with a trough over the northern Gulf in the state of Florida and even over towards the Gulf Stream on the East Coast, there is that chance of something spinning up on it, because climatology tells us that this time of year, with a broad area of instability forming up over the Gulf, you could be looking at something. At the very least, it would be an increase in rainfall and thunderstorms. So this is not hype or anything. This is just basically using meteorological conjecture to kind of see what was going on out here. For the time being, though, there's nothing at this point. And you even see that here in our wave heights across the Atlantic and into the Gulf, 1 to 2 feet, nothing too bad. We are also looking at the main formation area out towards the east, and we have a lot of Saharan dust actually keeping things mostly dry in a good portion of the Atlantic. That's why we're not getting a barrel, for example, like we've seen in June and early July last year. There's just too much dust kind of in here. Now, if you notice so closely on this graphic, look across the main formation region out there in central areas of the Atlantic. There is all that dust. There's also in the deeper Caribbean, we also have increased shear out there, keeping things down. But over Florida, there's not a lot of dust. So you're not seeing those sunsets or anything like that. The really beautiful ones we typically see with the Saharan dust, it's kind of backed off a bit. And without a lack of that, we have that increase in moisture and thus that increase in rainfall and that risk of tropical potential. So there's multiple factors, not just looking at the models here. We're looking at a few things. By the way, if you're curious, if you're new to the meteorological game or the tropical weather forecasting, you're curious, okay, what is Saharan dust? It sounds like a made-up term. From the Saharan desert, we have dust. Yeah, that's basically it. It is dust being picked up out of the Saharan desert, gets carried all the way across the Atlantic, and it blocks out the sun, so you decrease temperature. It adds dry air into the atmosphere, so you decrease the moisture. And, well, it also does reflect the sunlight, and it makes for some really beautiful sunrises and sunsets. So fun little fact there. If you are under any of these areas with that Saharan dust blowing overhead. It's usually in the mid to upper level portions of the atmosphere, but sometimes it can mix down towards the surface and even cause like issues for people with poor respiratory systems. So, hey, Danae brought me a bottle of water. I'm over here just coughing away. Thank you very much, sir. One of our techs behind the scene here. An absolute legend. All right, so let's talk about that long-range forecast. And then, you know, if we're talking about specifically with models, and I'm pointing this out, and I really want to kind of, this is not a hype video, so let's talk about a little bit of science behind it and why even if some of your long-range guidance, 300 hours out, is saying, hey, there might be a storm, and I go, I don't know. Remember, think of pachinko. Or what's the game on The Price is Right? It's Plinko. Pachinko is the gambling one that you play in Japan. It's where Plinko comes from. There are many different paths that a storm could take. So you have that initialization, but chaos theory says that, you know, even if you have input of a specific spot, if there's slight adjustments in that initial input or slight different ways that our global models handle that input, the long-range spread can differ. And the further and further out you go in that model, the more different or more variable or uncertainty, however you want to put it, is going to increase. And that's what this graphic kind of shows you, is that the closer you are to an actual date, there's more certainty, but we're looking 2 weeks out here into mid to late July, probably closer to the 19th to the 20th. So there is still a lot of uncertainty here with it. So something to keep in mind if you're looking at some of these long-range models. This is a GFS kind of showing you the broader pressures across the area, really indicating there in that green, the high pressure towards our east, and not really showing many concentric circles for an area of low pressure or any storms like that. And there's no hurricanes being picked up on this for, my goodness, none of that either. But as I mentioned, we go back to what the long-range GFS is kind of showing. And right there, you can see that here. Let's go ahead through Saturday and the Sunday. You can see some circles popping up here on our ensembles. This is the GFS versus the European. And that is showing that elongated low. Let's go ahead next Monday, Tuesday. How about right there? You see these circles that keep developing over northern Florida and into the Gulf? And let's look ahead into next Wednesday or towards Thursday. It's just these little weak area of low pressures, but you get that over those warm sea surface temperatures once again, and that could produce something out there. Sea surface temperatures right now, by the way, into the lower 80s. In fact, let me pull up the water temperature for you really quick. I had the buoys out earlier. It was showing the wave heights. I won't lie to you. I actually thought that was the sea surface temperature graphic. So this is it right here. You can see over the Gulf, mid to high 80s. Look at that, 87. Woof. And I say woof because 80 degrees is what you need. Once we get up to 90, we're talking about these just gasoline to the fire for tropical development. So there's definitely an increased risk if any areas in the tropics do decide to develop over the northern Gulf, just because of those warm sea surface temperatures, which in July, don't forget, northern areas of the Gulf is a kind of a likely formation area. And, you know, you look towards our east where we already had Chantal form, that's right spot on. You have that area just towards the east of Florida. And then when I talk about that main formation area, I'm talking about out there towards the Lesser Antilles, but all that dry air I was showing you a second ago with the Saharan dust would decrease the potential of any tropical cyclone formation in those specific areas too. So really at this time, we're going to watch the Northern Gulf or the Gulf Stream just off of the East Coast. Now, you might be curious, okay, tropical season has, feels slow. Not really. We're right up to C name, but it's not too late. On average, our first hurricane in the Atlantic is not until about August 11th. So we haven't had a hurricane yet, but to have one now, even here in early July, still would be a little bit earlier than average. First major hurricane, that would be a Cat 4 or 5 on average. It's not until September when we get closer to the peak of hurricane season. You can see that big spike up there. September 10th is the actual peak, where 9 out of 10 times we're going to have a named storm system somewhere in the Atlantic on September 10th. But if you notice here, July 10th is listed right there, when we're recording this. It's just the start of the climb. We're getting a little bit on the lower slopes of the mountain here, but we're not quite going up the cliff face just yet towards that peak of hurricane season. So at least for the time being, we're just starting to climb up. Chantal has already been named. If we do get another storm system named, it would be called Dexter. And then after that, Aaron, Fernand, and Gabriel. Just a little fun fact there for you. And I did mention, the long-range outlook as well. I do want to note this yesterday, and I just talked to somebody from Colorado State University, and they just updated their tropical cyclone forecast here just a few days ago. And they are saying 16, 8, and 3 storms now. That's down about 1. Originally they were going with 17 named storms, and they said it was one of the main reasons for it was an increase in vertical wind shear across the Atlantic that we're seeing a little bit more than what they expected here a couple months ago. But the sea surface temperatures are very warm. Not quite as warm as they were in 2024, but still above average. So it just shows you we have mid to high 80s out there in the Gulf. So they back the numbers, but they still keep it above average, which the 30-year average is 14 named storms. They're going with 16 now. 7 hurricanes is the average. They're going with 8. And then they're going right about the average major hurricanes. We are nearly ENSO neutral. So typically La Nina means more storms. ENSO neutral means about average. So slightly above average sea surface temperatures. ENSO neutral, it doesn't surprise me. And this is a little bit below 2024. So not hyping it. Just no frills here. Just trying to give you some of the facts of why they're looking at that, and also why we're looking at that long-range forecast, of course, with that trough setting up over the Gulf. So with all of that said, with all the details kind of laid out before you, if you see this graphic here, it is nothing to panic about. And to be quite frank, this time of year, these things do pop up from time to time. I haven't really seen a lot of Mets actually use this, but in the recent days, I see a lot of people showing what the Climate Prediction Center is showing, so I'm going to share it with you as well. I personally use this specific type of graphic a lot for forecasting typhoons because they don't have like a national hurricane center 5 to 10 day outlook. We are fortunate here in the United States to have so much resources allocated to good hurricane forecasting and making sure everybody's staying safe. And we are the leader in the global meteorological forecasting. So always got to appreciate that. And you always got to just remember that when you're getting that weather information from some of those smart people and atmospheric scientists as well. If you have any questions on that, please put it in the comment section if you're watching on any social medias, or you can send me a message and I would like to get back to you and answer some of those questions. I'm not going to take them all right now, but I will answer them here just by writing you or anything like that, and I'll reply to you. So I would like to hear if you have any questions about the long-range forecast, near-term forecast, or anything like that. But speaking of the long-range forecast and the leading of the National Hurricane Center, is one of the best meteorological agencies. With that said, I actually had the honor to talk to the director of the National Hurricane Center, Mr. Michael Brennan, Dr. Michael Brennan, I should say, about the 2025 season, what we can expect, and how you can prepare and what you should know as we lead into the peak of hurricane season. So this is a 15-minute discussion with him about what we are, and he is, looking at. So thanks for stopping by.
It's the 2025 hurricane season, and the National Hurricane Center has made some changes and improvements to the way warnings are issued and disseminated. This ranging from the size of the cone to the way we collect and distribute data from inside a hurricane. I got to talk to the National Hurricane Center Director Michael Brennan about these changes. So here's a look at that full interview.
First and foremost thing on top of people's minds, like, as we head into the 2025 hurricane season, let's say I am somebody brand new to the Gulf Coast of Florida. What do you think are just some of the main things that they should, and I know it's a broad question, but you kind of, what are some of the main things that you think they should be ready for, prepare for, they should have in the back of their mind as we head through May and into June?
Yeah, for somebody who's moving to a hurricane prone area the first time, you really have to start out by understanding what your risk is. Do you live in an area where you're susceptible to storm surge? That could be on the coast of Duval County. It could be along the St. Johns River. Or do you live inland and freshwater flooding from heavy rainfall is your biggest threat? Everybody's susceptible to wind impacts and tornado impacts. There's also the threat of rip currents along the coast. So it's really about understanding what the risk is where you live and developing a plan to keep you and your family safe based on that risk. So the most important thing is to find out if you live in a storm surge evacuation zone, because if you do, you could be asked by local officials to leave your home. You need to have a plan for how you're going to leave, how you're going to go, where you're going to go, how you're going to get there. And it's important to remind people that you don't always have to drive hundreds of miles or out of the state of Florida to get to a safe place in advance of a hurricane. You really just need to drive out of that storm surge evacuation zone and get to a safe place, a shelter, the home of a friend or loved one, where you can safely ride out the storm. And that might only mean driving 10 or 20 miles inland away from that storm surge threat to get to a safe place. And the other thing is, again, identify your home structural risks. Are you in a mobile home where you might be asked to leave even for a tropical storm? Are you in a flood-prone area that might need to be evacuated near a creek or a stream? And then finally, you want to think about supply kit. You want to have a disaster supply kit handy, not just for tropical storms and hurricanes, but for any other emergency. Multiple days of food, water, batteries, medicine, charging devices for your phone, and just ways that your equipment and supplies that you're going to need to be self-sufficient for several days in the aftermath of a storm when you might not have power.
And to kind of carry off of what you were just talking about, as far as getting prepared, especially if a storm is right on your doorstep. I know last year we started with the experimented cone graphics, and this year you're carrying on them again. Is there any changes from last year? And could you talk about maybe some lessons learned from last year, especially since we did have multiple storms that had impacts well inland?
Yeah, you're right. The experimental cone, this is an example of it from Milton last year. We rolled that out in August, so it was around during Helene and Milton in particular, two of the more impactful hurricanes we had, both of which made landfall in Florida. So the experimental cone shows the extent of tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings over inland areas. And you can see that in this case, almost the entire Florida peninsula was under some type of tropical storm or hurricane watch or warning. And again, showing that wind risk extends well outside the cone itself, which only tells you about where the center of the storm might go. You can see that Milton was a pretty big storm by the time it got to the Florida peninsula, brought those impacts over a wide area. So we got a lot of positive feedback about the cone, the experimental one last year, so we're continuing it this season. The only real substantial change is this area where we have a hurricane watch and a tropical storm warning in effect. We added a little more clear legend about what that means, this pink and blue hatching area. But overall, we're going to continue it this year. Have it available on hurricanes.gov, continue to gather comments and feedback and decide how to make any additional changes or whether to make it operational after the 2025 hurricane season.
And I guess to even carry and build on top of that, because another thing that I noticed in our press release here was that the cone is getting smaller. So can you just touch on, I think most people understand that means, the forecast is getting more accurate, but can you just touch on kind of what goes into the cone of air and to kind of build even more on top of that with a smaller cone? What do you think are some of the forecasts? Because I've seen this personally, the forecast challenges that go with a smaller cone of air and communicating to the broader public.
Yeah, so the cone really represents the likely path of the center of the storm. So this is the forecast for Milton here across the Gulf and across Florida and in the Western Atlantic. And these dots represent our official forecast of where we expect the center to be. And then the cone tells you where the center will be about 2/3 of the time. But it's based on our track forecast errors over the previous 5 years. So we had a pretty successful year for forecasting track in 2024. We set record low errors on average. So as those numbers come into the calculation and we drop off the earlier year, the cone is going to be about 5% smaller. So really not a huge change, probably wouldn't even be really perceptible to most people. But it does indicate that on average, track forecast errors are a lot smaller than they were, say 20 years ago. If you look back at a cone from 2005, it's going to be much, much bigger. It'd probably cover most of the state of Florida. But that does create a messaging challenge in the fact that, people need to realize that the cone just tells you where the center is going to be, likely. It doesn't tell you where the impacts are going to be. So the cone is just sort of a broad scale look at where the center of the tropical storm or hurricane is forecast or is likely to be. The watches and warnings and the other information for wind and storm surge, flooding, tornadoes tell you about the hazards. It would be really difficult, if not impossible, to indicate all that hazard information on a single graphic. So that's why we have different graphics that convey those different hazards and what those risks are.
And speaking of graphics and hazards, that really builds right into my next question, because, and this is actually a question not only for the general public, but also for me, the broadcaster. From your experience, what do you, because I could show somebody a satellite picture all day, and the big storms, people more or less ooh at it. They go, ooh, it's pretty. It doesn't translate to on the ground. So what do you think it's some of the most important things as broadcasters we should be doing to help relay some of that vital information? Because the cone is great, the Safford-Simpson scale, but I don't think sometimes that translates to storm surge. So I'll let you take it away, because I assume you know where I'm kind of going with this, but it's a hard time sometimes relaying some of that vital information.
Yeah, the focus really needs to be on the hazards. And a lot of times those are covered by watches and warnings, like the wind ones you see here, the storm surge watches and warnings that highlight areas at risk for life-threatening storm surge inundation, flood watches and warnings, tornado watches and warnings. So again, because those hazards really vary in time and space during a storm, you have to focus on those hazards individually, but then also, collectively for the entire storm, for everybody, say in your viewing area, which includes people at the coast, people inland. They have different risks. So people need to understand what their risks are and really seek out the information that's related to what their risk profile is, or where they live, or where their business is located, to make sure they can get that vital information. The good news is that we can push information to people too. When we issue a storm surge or hurricane warning, that triggers a wireless emergency alert on people's cell phones based on where they're located. So if the warning is in effect for your area, you're going to get notified of that. People need to find their trusted sources of information, their broadcast meteorologist that they watch every day, who's going to be able to help guide them through the information that's coming out during a storm, which can be somewhat overwhelming at times because there is a lot of information, not just coming from the National Hurricane Center or your local National Weather Service office, but in the larger sort of media ecosystem that includes not just traditional media, but social media. So it's important for people to have those trusted sources of information, find them now so that they're not looking for them during a storm.
And I'll jump into this question here, as I heard you mention the different ways things are getting pushed and social media, and you kind of already answered it, but just kind of ask in a broader scope. You started what in 2008 or late 2000s, right at the NHC? What do you think from your perspective as relaying that information and the public's perspective is the biggest change in the way they get the information about hurricanes? But not only that, the way they kind of process it. For example, I know evacuations used to be a lot broader back then. Now it's a lot more concise. So just from your perspective, what do you think in the last almost 20 years has been the biggest change?
Yeah, I think, well, the way people consume information is rapidly changing. You live this every day. You're in traditional media, and there's still a lot of people that especially in an emergency like a hurricane, turn on the television and watch their local television stations to get information. So we still try to get information to them through the media pool, through the broadcast meteorology community. But we also know people consume information on their phone. Some people don't ever watch television anymore. They have apps, they have social media. So we're trying to push information out through places like live streams and other social media platforms, short videos, to again, we're not going to get we're not going to be able to provide someone every piece of information they need about a hurricane in a 1-minute reel that we're going to post on Instagram, but we can at least raise awareness and then encourage them to go seek out information through some other channel by coming to our website, looking to their local media, connecting with their local government officials. So it's a way to try to reach people where they are and then try to point them to places where they can get more comprehensive information. So again, you're right, we can provide a lot more detail now. You go back to when I started here at NHC in 2008, we didn't have a watch or warning for storm surge. We weren't able to highlight those areas specifically at risk of life-threatening inundation. Now we can, and as you mentioned, evacuation zones have become a lot more refined. It's not just a whole big chunk of a county. Now it might just be one small piece of a barrier island or an area along the St. Johns River. So as information has gotten more precise, in some ways it's become a little more difficult for people to consume and understand. So we just have to keep making sure that we can get our voice out there with the authoritative information, and that across sort of the weather and hurricane enterprise, we amplify those sources of authoritative information, whether it's coming from us in the National Weather Service or from state and local government officials that are telling people where to evacuate and how to get ready for an event.
Oh, thank you. And one other question I had here is almost on the line of improving technology, is that nowadays we have drones coming in off of planes. We have the sail drone out there. How are these new different recon and areas of technology improving your forecast?
Yeah, a lot of it goes back to the data from the Hurricane Hunter aircraft. So for example, you can look, here's a radar picture from one of the NOAA Hurricane Hunters flying through the storm out over the ocean where we don't have radar data. All of the ground-based radars are on land. So this is getting us data here that's giving us a view of what the storm looks like from the inside for our forecasters to look at. But this radar data, the precipitations, the structure, the wind field, is all getting into the forecast models that help us predict the track and the intensity of a storm, which then directly plays into where the storm surge is going to be, the heavy rainfall, the wind. So all the aircraft reconnaissance data that come from the Hurricane Hunters going into the models improve those track and intensity forecasts by about 10 to 20%. And that's really been a big change in recent years. And it's also helped us to improve our forecast of rapidly intensifying storms. And if you look back at, say the storms from 2024, we had Helene and Milton in particular that both underwent rapid intensification before landfall. We're out and now actually able to make some of those more aggressive intensity forecasts that we wouldn't have been able to make, say, in 2008 or 9. We just wouldn't have had the confidence to forecast a storm to strengthen by 30 or 40 miles per hour in a 24-hour period. Now we are able to issue those more aggressive forecasts, which get us into the right expectation for setting the level of what types of hazards people might have to be dealing with the storm.
Wow. Thank you, Michael. One last question. Is if there's anything I haven't may have mentioned here for you that you think that heading into the 2025 hurricane season, that people absolutely should be at least aware of as we get ready for this upcoming tropical year?
Well, that it doesn't take a hurricane or a major hurricane affecting your area directly to cause substantial life-threatening impacts, especially from freshwater flooding, from heavy rainfall. Has almost nothing to do with how strong a storm is from a wind perspective. A tropical depression, a weak tropical storm can produce life-threatening flooding. And that's been the biggest killer in the United States in tropical storms and hurricanes over the last 10 or so years. It just matters how hard it rains and how long it rains in a particular location. And the other thing I'll touch on is just post-storm safety. We've seen a substantial number of post-storm fatalities in recent years in tropical storms and hurricanes, especially after major hurricanes, when you have long duration power outages. You think about the aftermath of a hurricane in Florida in August or September with no power. It's going to be really hot. People aren't going to have air conditioning. People succumb to heart attacks, other medical issues, just accidents that occur from cleaning up or driving around in an environment after a storm. We lose a lot of people to car accidents. So it's just a reminder that you don't want to just survive the storm itself. You need to also survive the aftermath, and don't come back to evacuated areas until you've been told it's safe to do so by your local officials.
And that's a good point, because we always seem like we always prepare for that first wave, and then no one really thinks about the weeks afterwards.
Yeah.
So really good point there, Mike. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me here, Dr. Brennan from the National Hurricane Center. I know you got a busy day, so I'll let you get about it. But yeah, thank you so much for taking and answering a couple of my questions. I really appreciate it.
Great to talk to you. Thanks.